That was played by the 16-year-old Allan Evans. Amazing, right? Probably comes as a shock to many of you. Well, welcome to everybody. It's hard to begin such a meeting without a sigh, and I know that you know what I'm talking about and how we feel. I'd also like to welcome not only all of you who are here in attendance in Brooklyn, but those of you who are listening on the Vimeo live stream, wherever you may be located in the world. Welcome to everybody, and thanks for tuning us in as it happens. Allan, when he played that on the guitar, was under the spell of his mentor, Reverend Gary Davis. Allan began his musical career as a blues guy, and Gary Davis was his first, let's say, Ishta Devata, a Hindu expression, not Hindi, but a Hindu expression. Well, I think it's Sanskrit, actually, for the god or deity that you have chosen to be your own personal guide through the world, through the spirit world, you could say. And I also want to thank very much Phil Mango, who had the foresight to record these performances on the guitar by Allan Evans. Thanks, Phil, so much. And we'll be hearing more from Phil's recordings later. Allan developed a very close relationship with Reverend Gary Davis in the last months, I believe, of Gary Davis's life. Then Gary Davis passed away. But before I go on, and I'll try not to make this too extended because we have a lot of people who have things to say, both live and on videos. But I'd like to say that this is a memorial for Allan. And most memorials, in my memory, were family-centered memorials, where this or that aunt or uncle, a parent, the members were, aside from friends, were mainly held together by blood ties. And it's a duty, a family duty, to attend events like that, and they should be held. And it's true that blood is thicker than water, but spirit is stronger than blood. And this is a community bound in spirit. And the spirit of everything Allan stood for, which was essentially things other than himself. Allan existed for the sake of others, whether those others be still living or yet to be born. And that's what propelled Allan through life. The concern that others should know what is great in the world as he saw it. And this is not a duty for us, it's a privilege. And I feel very warmly and close to all of you here because we're all united in our love for an exceptionally memorable, deep-thinking, generous, honest, truth-loving friend, Allan Evans. So thank you all for creating such an atmosphere. It's something that, as a friend of Allan's, I'm very grateful for, and I know that his family is also very grateful. I didn't really think that I would start to crack here while I'm speaking with you, but it just kind of, you all know what's going on here. The Reverend Gary Davis died in May of 1972. Then, there was Allan without a mentor. Enter WBAI. You're going to love this. Are you loving it yet? We're okay. There, dear James, that's me, James Irsay. I didn't introduce myself, I'm so sorry. Could you play these on Past Masters, please? Past Masters was a radio program I had on WBAI. I'm still on WBAI and others, another station. And I played old records, to put it succinctly. First, he wants to hear Arthur Friedheim and his recording of Chopin's Revolutionary Etudes. That's a mistake, a rare mistake by Allan, because Friedheim never recorded the Revolutionary Etude. He was thinking of Ignaz Friedman. He had Friedman on the mind. He couldn't even swipe him out of the way for the sake of Arthur Friedheim. And then the rest, these are all probably many of you, familiar names to many of you. Anything by Dvorak-Magosi, especially Ignaz Friedman, in big letters on the bottom. The reason he said that, by the way, you'll notice that on the bottom left, there's a finger pointing, and that says, clean fingernails, even. And then his astonishing signature, which is looks like a signature of Miro or somebody rather than Allan Evans. But he kept that signature for his whole life. The reason he says especially Ignaz Friedman is because on my program, Past Masters, I aired something that I found in a little thrift shop, on the floor, no less. I had no idea who this was. This was 1972. There was a 78 record with that blue Columbia label on it, you know, that 1920s look Columbia label with that beautiful blue label. It said, Chopin Polonaise in A flat, played by Ignaz Friedman. Who? Nobody knew who this guy was, and no, they didn't know, you know. And I brought it in, played it on the air, and it was just epoch-making, that performance. And it sounded something like this. You could give us... That's some serious animated expression there. How many of you have never heard Ignaz Friedman playing that etude? So many of you have, and that's because of Allan. He heard it on WBAI and thought, he practically made puja to Ignaz Friedman right there on the spot. Lit some incense and covered it with ghee, poured ghee over it, and adopted Ignaz Friedman as his next mentor. And yada, 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 this is the result. One of the many results, I should say. This is Allan's book on Ignaz Friedman, Romantic Master Pianist. 30 years in the making. Many countries visited, relatives of Friedman, and he grew close with Friedman's daughter and granddaughter. Allan was well known for receiving gifts, for offering gifts to people, unexpected gifts. This was his gift to me because I introduced him. I wasn't thinking that I didn't know Allan. This is how I met him, from that postcard. I got tons of mail from listeners, but I didn't keep a lot of them. But this is one I kept. And Allan is a friend who I kept for decades, all the decades. This is what Allan presented me with. This is the nameplate Friedman from his Italian villa in Siusi in Italy. I look at it as an amulet. Friedman, El Shaddai. We have many people here who are going to speak live and on video. I just wanted to leave you, as long as I have the mic. Beatrice, forgive me. But Allan's search was about truth, with a capital T. He published on his Arbiter label several CDs of violinist Erika Morini, great Austrian violinist. He published a live concert of the Louis Spohr Ninth Concerto, which is not well known. And this performance in the 1960s of Morini was 30 years before the first commercial recording of that concerto was published. People knew his In Form eine Gesangsszene violin concerto in the form of a dramatic cantata, but not this one. But Erika Morini was a big booster for the music of Louis Spohr. She performed it live with Musica Eterna, conducted by Frederick Waldman, whom some of you may remember, an important figure in New York music. He discovered the acetates to this live recording during a closet rummaging session with Frederick Waldman, who was 91 at the time, in Waldman's closet. This is what I call the Evans home invasion research technique. Very fruitful method. And in this CD, it's really something quite remarkable. And that's why I'm probably overstepping the time limits that I'm allotted to tell you this little story, because it says so much about Allan in a very subtle way. Because this performance of this gorgeous Louis Spohr concerto, this neglected Louis Spohr concerto in D minor, Louis Spohr invented things. He invented rehearsal marks and scores. He also, I believe, invented the chin rest for violins. He was a great violinist. We could call this incident at letter D. A little bit into the second movement of this violin concerto, Erika Morini comes in early after an brief orchestral introduction. And she starts to float away, lost in space. She doesn't stop, doesn't say, Maestro, could we take it from letter D, or anything like that. She is spaced out. She's playing long notes that have nothing to do with what's going on in the orchestra. Sometimes they would be fit in with the harmony, but sometimes they wouldn't. And they would just be, she went on like this for a full minute in a live performance of the Spohr concerto. Eventually, they realized, hey, look, that's it. Waldman started to sing a little bit where she should be, but that was useless because she was already untethered, tumbling around in zero gravity with her bow arm still moving over the strings, seemingly randomly. And they spoke and got back together for take two, and they take it from letter D. This is probably what they said. Somebody tell me, raise your hand if you want to answer this question. What happened when they started again from letter D? Anybody know? Want to guess? Seth? I told you already. She did it again. She came in early again at the exact same wrong spot. But this time, she caught herself and came in again at the right place after a few beats, not even measures, but a few beats. And the thing is, and then Marini, what a wonderful fiddler. The thing is that on the CD, Allan does not mention anything about this mishap. As far as the people who acquired the CD were concerned, it's a performance live of Erika Marini doing the Spohr D minor concerto, number 9. The thing is, he could have fixed it. I did. When I broadcast it, I didn't broadcast Erika Marini doing with her Lost in Space section. I had to get another recording to fit the orchestra part in there because she always entered early, so the orchestra introduction was always had the wrong playing behind it. He could have done that, but he didn't. He didn't because that's not what happened. He didn't say anything about it, and he issued it like that because that's the experience. That's what happened. That's real. That was the truth. Even if it got in the way of that concerto and may have, made Erika Marini look bad for that moment. I mean, everybody has slips like that. I think that's a telling thing. He didn't mention it at all. He left it for the listener to decide. Oh, look at this. Oh, and many people didn't even realize, I'm sure, they listened to it, they had no idea what went on, what happened, because they're not musicians. But Allan let it go. And the most important thing for Allan was not to explain it away or fix it. The important thing for Allan was to tell the truth. And I always thought that was amazing. All right, I've used up enough time for about 10 people already, right? So we're probably going to be going until 8 o'clock or so as a result of all this. All right. I'm going to make way for our next guest, and we're going to hear some live music. And I'll let our guest introduce himself and his, I'll let him introduce. Okay, so here we go.
Thank you. It's great to see all of you. My name is David Krakauer. I'm looking around the room. I think perhaps I'm the person here who knew Allan the longest. I had friends, I had pals in elementary school, junior high school. But I have to say that Allan was my first real friend. And really, we were in communication up until about 2 or 3 days before he passed away. It's profound for me to know Allan and to have loved him as one of the most amazing and dear people ever. We met in the summer of 1971 in Portland, Maine, in front of the grimy old Greyhound bus station. A bunch of kids had come up from New York City to study at a music camp, the Amherst Summer Music Center. And the bus dropped us off, and we were all there on the corner. And then we had to all, since there were various buses and trains and planes and whatever bringing people to Portland, we were waiting for our ride to camp. So there's this guy with crazy long hair. And by the way, that concert, that photo that you saw of Allan playing the 12-string guitar, I was at that concert. It was at a church on the east side somewhere. I don't remember exactly. And it is possible that I took that photo. I'm not sure. But I did take photos of him playing that concert with my father's old German camera, black and white film. So it's very possible that was my photo. Who knows? But anyway, we were there at the bus station, and Allan had his 12-string guitar, and he was into Reverend Davis, and I had a soprano saxophone, and I was into Sidney Bechet. And so we had a common language, the blues. And there were a bunch of campers around, and it was festive on that grimy old corner. And we took out our instruments, and we started to play the blues together, and we became friends that very moment. I wrote some reminiscences in the program book. You can read them at some point. Because right after Allan died, I just dug into my memory and tried to remember every single thing that I could. And I wrote down a lot of stuff. And so that was really amazing for me and very cathartic at that moment to write those memories down. So I'm going to play a piece of music for you, a special piece of music that I created for Allan and Beatrice's wedding. And so the way that came about was that they got married at the Rothko Chapel in Houston. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. The absolutely incredible Rothko paintings. And so Allan said to me, I want you to play something for our wedding, and I want it to be special and amazing. And I think that if you look at these Rothko paintings, you'll come up with something. So I had some ideas I was playing around with. I had just learned how to circular breathe. I was very excited about that. I was playing around with some little melodic ideas and some microtones. And so I thought, okay, maybe I can use those ideas. And Allan said, here, Beatrice and I have to go take care of paperwork. We'll be back in about an hour. So sit there and look at the paintings. Well, I don't know if you've seen those paintings or reproductions, but when you look at them at first, they look like they're just brown or gray. So I was like, wow, this is going to be a really long hour. So I sat on a bench, one of those museum benches, and I sat and I looked at the paintings. And suddenly the paintings began to throb and breathe. And it was absolutely a hallucinatory experience to really experience those paintings like a living organism. It was just an amazing, amazing trip that I went on. And so then when they came back and the wedding ceremony happened, and then I played this piece that I called Rothko on Broadway, because I thought about the layering technique of Rothko, but I also thought of Rothko in New York City on Broadway and a certain vibrancy. So before I play the piece, just one thing I did want to share, one last thing, was that final communication with Allan. He had posted a recording of his mother playing Chopin. And I heard it. My partner, Kathleen, was playing it on the computer. And I said, oh, that's amazing piano playing. Who is that? And then she said, it's Allan's mother. And I was I never met Allan's mother. I was very close to Allan's father. But his mother had passed away before I met him. And I was like, this is amazing. And I wrote to him immediately, and I said, that's so incredible. And he wrote back to me, And he quoted one of his other mentors who he apprenticed with, Sam Holskinner, the insane piano tuner. And Sam Allan probably was slow and meticulous trying to learn his trade, and Sam Holskinner would say, come on, keep moving, come on. And Allan wrote to me, his final words to me were, come on, keep playing. So, I'm going to lose it now. I think I'll play instead.
I now pronounce you man and wife. Wow. David, that was great. You know who you are.
Two bats, two Too bad. Pine box in the hole. Finnegan's dead. Donkey's ears. You know, that's all I remember of that song. This is a song that Allan wrote in 1980. He told me a story about some demented guy who showed up at a wake. And he's looking over the coffin and he's clapping his hands like this and going, "That's it, he's dead. Too bad, Finnegan's dead," all kinds of non sequiturs. And Allan was obsessed with this little story, so he set it to music. He wrote an art song, and then he presented the song to his composition professor, Hugo Weisgall, at Queens College. Professor Weisgall was not amused, needless to say. I was living with Allan. Oh, I should introduce myself. I'm Jed Distler, and I was living with Allan at Bound Street in Queens. His father had remarried, and I applied for the job, so I lived in the apartment with Allan for a little more than a year. We made a recording of that song, Too Bad. I played the piano, and Allan sang it in this inimitable voice. I have no idea what happened to the tape. Maybe it's in the archive. And Allan jokingly said, "Jed, I want this. You really have to perform this at my memorial service." And I looked at him, I said, "Be careful what you wish for, buddy." Ironically. But my first encounter with Allan was when he was studying composition at the Mannes School as an undergraduate, and David Krakauer and I, we were classmates and buddies at Sarah Lawrence College, and David said, "Oh, you have to meet my friend Allan. He's a composer, and he loves dead pianists, but he also composes," and that was the same with me. And so we went to this concert, and he had a piece called Nocturnes. It was a chamber piece. What I remember was that Allan's program notes for Nocturnes had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the music he wrote, and everything to do with historic pianists. He just ranted on about Emil von Sauer and Vladimir de Pachmann and Alfred Cortot, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we had a reception at David's parents' house after the concert, and Allan and I meet, and we start talking. We're talking about music and our mutual love of Liszt, and I'm saying, "Oh yeah, I just saw Earl Wild play Liszt at Carnegie Hall, a Hungarian Rhapsody." Allan stops me. "Oh, Earl Wild, he's too modern for me. You have to hear Alfred Cortot. I have the original 78s. Okay. And then I started asking him about Vladimir de Pachmann, who he mentioned in the program note about his contemporary piece of music. He talks about Vladimir de Pachmann, right? So I said, "Well, I've read about Pachmann. I've never heard him. How was his recording of the Liszt Rigoletto paraphrase?" "Which recording? He recorded it 3 times. I thought, oh my God, I've met this piano maniac. But without knowing it, Allan opened the door to a rabbit hole that I fell down, and I'm still falling down 43 years later. And then Allan invited me to visit his apartment. This is long before I moved in. I lugged my reel-to-reel tape deck. Some of you may remember what those big, big things are. I schlepped it in a duffel bag from New Jersey. I took 2 trains and schlepping over to Bound Street, and we stayed up till all hours taping Allan's 78s. And that's when I met his father for the first time, and his father cooked us some very undistinguished hamburgers. And I think because of, Sam was lovely, but his hamburgers were not lovely. And I think that's what inspired Allan to take up cooking. And I also remember in Allan's apartment, he had reams of manuscript paper on the wall, either scotch taped or nailed, I can't remember. it was all empty. And I asked, what is this? And what he was planning on doing was filling up these reams of paper with his magnum opus called Das Reptilischen Schmeckele. I think it was an oratorio or pageant, or I think it was supposed to be the next ring cycle. I have no idea. Those reams of music paper never got filled. The only thing he wrote was a piano piece. It may have been an introduction, a piece called Lazardesian Thoughts. And I actually premiered that at Queens College in 1979. I don't know if Hugo Weisgall liked that piece or not. I liked the piece. And I remember when I coached it with Allan, all he would tell me was that you have to play more like a dead pianist. You have to, don't play your hands together and use more pedal. And needless to say, I tried. But over the years, Allan's creativity and musical passions veered from creating his own music to preserving the music making of others, as we've been talking about. And it wasn't enough for Allan to just appreciate the playing of Ignaz Friedman or Reverend Gary Davis or traditional Balinese musicians. He had to discover why they played how they played, what was their lineage, who did they teach, what documentation do we have? And I was living with Allan when he made his first trips to Europe and pouring through libraries and radio station archives and meeting the relatives of these musicians and pursuing his, I can't remember what you called it, James, the technique where you corner somebody to go in their closet and you rummage through everything. These wonderful research. Basically, Allan was not so much a musicologist as he was an archaeologist, saving performances, preserving cultures. And he would get so excited when he'd make a discovery. I mean, when my landline rings, I still imagine him calling me up at odd hours. Oh, hi, Chad, it's Allan. I just discovered this woman who lives on the Upper West Side. She never made any records, but I found these tapes. She's 95 years old, and she studied with Busoni, and the right hand doesn't work anymore, but what a tone. And this also, I think, applied to his love of food and cooking, and I can recall so many memorable meals with Allan and Beatrice. And it wasn't enough that he would use extra virgin olive oil. It had to be of special olive oil from a special region of Italy that was only pressed once a year. And every ingredient was like that. Yet, I think that for all of his erudition and love of things that bordered on the esoteric, Allan did not have a pedantic bone in his body. His generosity knew no bounds when he started Arbiter Records, not just with the booklet notes and the documentation, but the website where you would type in a name of, any given historic pianist. Allan had written long essays about their work and putting them in a cultural context and providing all kinds of links. Now, of course, Allan had his curious blind spots because on that website, if you clicked on Arthur Rubinstein, he didn't have a good thing to say about Arthur Rubinstein. He took every opportunity to trash Rubinstein. And I once played a Rubinstein recording for Allan. I didn't identify the pianist. He loved it. Then I said who the pianist was, and Allan tried to walk it back, but it didn't work. But then you click on Claudio Arau on his website. There's only one sentence: the Ayatollah of the piano. What the heck was that about? But that wasn't anywhere near as the way he lashed out at Renoir on Facebook. Any of you, if you're Facebook friends with Allan, did you see those almost daily posts about how horrible Renoir was? Well, I think we're all allowed our lapses, but the important thing is that Allan's enthusiasms, his love for life, his love for his family, his love for his work, and his ability to do what he wanted without any compromise still resonates with me, and I think it resonates with all of you. And it's just too bad. It's too bad that he's not with us, but he always will be with us. Thank you.
This is a submission from David Borden.
this happened. We came to one of the concerts we were giving. I had started an ensemble in 1969. Hi, my name is David Borton. I'm a composer and a performer, but I'm retired from performing after doing it for so long. I'm 82 and lucky to keep working on my music. Anyway, I've known Allan for over 40 years. And I think I met him, and I'm not sure about this, but I think this happened. That he came to one of the concerts we were giving. I had started an ensemble in 1969 called Mother Mallard's Portable Masterpiece Company. And it was the first all synthesizer band. We had 3 modular Moogs and 2 mini Moogs and an RMI piano. And we went from 69 to 78, although some of the people in the band were changed. Very friendly, everybody was friendly. But late in the 1970s, I think he came to a concert and he introduced himself afterwards and let me know how to get in touch with him. He gave me his address and phone number and everything. And so in 1982, after that first band had disbanded and so on, I wanted to hear a lecture in Flushing, where he lived. So I called him and asked if I could stay at his place. And he said, sure. So I drove down there and stayed with him, went to the lecture, and we talked about music and about music history a little bit and various things. And this apartment he was living in had been the apartment he had grown up in. And his parents were no longer alive. So we had a great time. And eventually, a few years later, the personal computer made their appearance in our lives, and we started emailing each other. And he wanted to know about the techniques I used to compose the continuing story of Counterpoint. So I talked and wrote to him about Bucky Fuller and his definition of synergy that really influenced the way I was composing. Synergy means behavior of whole systems unpredicted by the behavior of their parts taken separately. And I used this definition of synergy to develop my approach to Counterpoint and to also make pieces using entire parts composed by other composers like Mozart and Brahms, and then accompany these parts with my own music and so on. And in the late 1990s, Allan began his Arbiter CD label and started to release albums of recordings made by pianists in the early 20th century, which showed a whole new account of how the music was performed and interpreted then. And I think this is the beginning of what he called himself to be a sound archaeologist, and eventually produced more than 60 CDs of this kind. Well, in 2000 or 2001, I visited him again. He was still in Flushing, but at a different location, and by this time he was married to Beatrice. And they had a son, Stefan, who was 6 or 7. He told me about playing music to audiences in Eastern Europe, where he lectured and did various appearances, and how they seemed to understand all of the strange meters and harmonic changes there in my music. And so then Allan talked to me about releasing some Mother Mallard recordings that had never been heard, and I told him about the WBAI concerts and the Diplomat Hotel concert, which I knew had been recorded. And he did his research, and in 2003 he brought out his Mother Mallard's Portable Masterpiece Company CD, which contained some live recordings made in 1977 at the Diplomat Hotel as part of the Avant-Garde Music Festival. The recording was made by a young kid named Edward Haber, who had some help from Phil Glass's sound engineer. And later, Ed Haber became WNYC's head sound engineer. And this CD contained an exciting performance of the continuing story of Counterpoint, Part 1, which had just been composed a year earlier. And this ensemble consisted of me, Chip Smith, and Judy Borcher, probably the best Moog band I ever had. And these Chip and Judy were great to work with. They were wonderful and did everything you could ask. And from then on, he started talking about his lymphoma and the treatments he was receiving. And this went on for a long time. Until 2015, he said he had been cured and was healthy again. And he had to have a few more chemos to clear up a few things. But eventually, he had intense chemo, maybe 9 days in a row. It sounded horrible. And then he had stem cell collection collected from his own body, and then several days later they were replanted. And this took a long time and was not pleasant. It was supposed to reboot his immune system and do away with his lymphoma totally. All this did happen, but the treatment caused his lungs to produce fiber, which eventually grew all over his lungs, and this is what did him in. The lungs could no longer really breathe. They were no longer flexible. So, and his last emails were about wanting to attend the Mother Mallard 50th anniversary concerts, but he couldn't travel to Ithaca with his oxygen tanks. And finally, he wrote to say that one of his lungs collapsed, but it afforded him 10 days of wonderful hospital food. Now, this kind of humor that he had always had when he was talking about anything that happened to him that was not pleasant, but he made a joke of it. And this was the last I heard from him. And 6 months later, he was no longer with us. He used to tell me that he was glad I composed my music because otherwise he would have had to do it. And I always loved to hear from Allan. I miss him very, very much. He was a great man, innovative, caring, and full of life's wisdom, a great friend, a really great friend. Thank you for listening.
Many of us know the name Sarah Fishko from her long years at WNYC Radio, where she produced a program called The Fishko Files. More than once, she consulted Allan for his vast knowledge. I myself have known Sarah since our early teens, when we went to the same music camp in Massachusetts, in Stockbridge, called Indian Hill. Sarah had Allan on her program to speak about how he discovered Iren Marek. And it is really something, and you're going to love hearing Allan describe this meeting with a lost and forgotten and very fine pianist.
It was a day in New York near the end of the 1970s. Allan Evans, teacher, former pianist, record producer, and collector of rare musical archives, remembers it was a gray day.
So a casual walk after a day's work into a shop which seemed like an outpost of detritus, of trashed recordings of sounds no longer wanted by anyone.
It was in Chelsea, long before that neighborhood was the center of anything, let alone art.
And in the dreariest spot on the floor, a stack of unwrapped discs. But the program was very shocking to see these rare Liszt works.
The featured pianist on the LP was completely unfamiliar to Evans, a Hungarian name, Iren Marek. He was curious and paid $1 for a copy, took it home, and put it on his turntable.
And listening to it, it made such an impact of an understanding. You hear an artist who's probed the work to its essence and has such a concept of style This name meant nothing, absolutely nothing.
He listened on. The music spilled out. He had a feeling that Marek, as a Hungarian pianist of that generation, must have come in contact with the central figure in Hungarian music at the time.
This cloying feeling, did she know Bartók? For some reason that became very important.
He was hooked. He began poking around, trying to find out anything he could about the mysterious Marek.
And then finding a few traces of her. There was a Hungarian diplomat, a retired diplomat, and he had met her in 1947. After that, he had no trace.
Then, by chance, another record appeared in a shop near Carnegie Hall. This one had her photo on the cover.
This very informal snapshot of someone sitting very regally at the piano. And it was sealed in plastic, except for a little tear in the plastic that could have been done by a sharp instrument. So I grabbed it.
On this record, more penetrating readings of Liszt and also Debussy, Scriabin, Ravel, and Couperin. But what about the tear in the plastic sleeve of the record?
That tear was because a letter had been put into it by a colleague of Marek's, who was the great writer, Evelyn Eaton.
The writer had inserted a letter into Marek's recording and sent it off to Harold C. Schoenberg, then the New York Times music critic. Eaton had hoped to help her friend get a little attention from the press.
And the letter was 8 years old. He never opened the disc. He just kept it somewhere. It was taking up space, and he got rid of it.
That letter, slipped into the LP that Schoenberg had disposed of, provided the clue that led Evans to Marek, her address. He looked her up, and there she was.
I called her right away, found her.
Was she a student of Bartók's? Yes, she said. She'd studied with him for half a year. Could Evans visit her next week? Yes, she said, of course.
She was 77 when we met, on her birthday, when a pickup truck picked me up at a dusty bench on the town's only street, Independence, California.
Irene Marek had been on her way to a brilliant pianistic career. She'd played in all the great European capitals when war intruded. She endured hardships during the war and then defected in the late 40s during a concert tour in America, leaving then Soviet-dominated Hungary forever. Her career had never recovered. She had made only these 2 commercial recordings.
That was it, and they were unavailable after a year or 2.
So there she was, living in retirement in the California desert, playing the piano.
And she opened her home up to the community, giving herself the task of preparing a full-length concert every month with a new repertoire, and inviting the whole town and all that in, anyone who would come. People would drive up from Los Angeles, which was at least a 6-hour drive. So into her living room and outside, you would have about 100 people. So she kept her art alive and vital this way.
Evans befriended the pianist, studied with her a little, talked with her a lot, and looked over her archive, which was painfully small. Irene Marek died in 1986, at which point he thought, how sad that her playing wasn't better known. But there is a significant postscript to the story.
After her passing, the people in charge of her estate found that there were boxes in the garage of about 100 hours of her recordings with plenty of Bartók, late Beethoven sonatas, and much more.
And the 100 hours or so worth of tapes, she'd never spoken of them during her lifetime, had been bequeathed to Allan Evans so that he might find a way to get them out.
So we sit here, we talk about someone who's just a name, who's not well known, but in a way it's like a musical Tutankhamun, because through her you hear an insight into the composers. And this is what's so important about history.
They are an important link, it's true, especially to Bartók. But what is rare and interesting about these recordings is that except for a few pieces intended for commercial release, most of them were made at Marek's home as she played or practiced. No producers or engineers present, no audience, and even more important, no retakes, and therefore no editing. so they're not subject to the same conditions as most, or rather all, of the recorded music we tend to hear.
So that instead of getting a performance from her, you'll get an experience, a great musical experience.
When was the last time you had one of those? Bartok in the Desert, The Art of Irene Marek, is a 2-CD set available on Arbiter, Allan Evans' independent mid-price CD label. Coming out June 1st, new recordings by Mieczyslaw Horszowski, found by Evans while digging around in the private collections of institutes, music lovers, and musicians, all of them never heard before. For WNYC, I'm Sarah Fishko.
Apparently, Allan and Madame Marek had difficulties in communicating by phone. She would call Allan, he wouldn't be there. It was haphazard, and Irene Marek decided that Allan should know about this and maybe they could do something about it, so she left him a message of her own, a telephone message.
This is your good Hungarian friend, and I want to talk to you, but if you would only tell me when, I could call you back instead of you calling me. Bad boy. Goodbye.
Bad boy, goodbye. And by the way, she never drank wine. Let's have some more bluesman Allan Evans. And I want to thank Anthony Sapienza for producing a video podcast called Seventh Hour Blues, which featured blues people, and one of those blues people was Reverend Gary Davis, and Allan commented about Reverend Davis. There's an interview with Michael Rogozin, who is the son of Lionel Rogozin, who produced a wonderful movie in the 70s called Black Roots, about African Americans' lives and situation in America. And then we'll finish off with Allan, at 16 again, playing something called Make Believe Stunt on the guitar, probably intentionally made to sound a bit like Maple Leaf Rag. And thanks Phil Mango for this recording as well. So here we have 3 elements, 3 video recordings of bluesman Allan Evans at age 16. Well, the interview is not at age 16, but the playing is.
I only had 4 lessons over the year. I'm probably the last pupil because he was very sick that year. He had strokes, he was hospitalized. Again, I would cut school, bring him some fruit and cassettes of Lonnie Johnson and Blind Blake to hear in the hospital and to try to pass the time with him. And he was wonderful company. But during those lessons, they would last from, like the first one was 4 hours, and the extraordinary generosity of someone like him to give a beginner, a nothing from nowhere, so much time is so inspiring. And he also, if you were getting what he was doing somewhat, he would give you some signs of approval, which made you feel like somehow maybe he favored you and you wanted to do your best the next time. So inevitably you would go home and practice, and it was just the most inspiring experience possible. And then on the musical level, this was really fascinating. Most guitarists, when they play the blues, they would hold the guitar horizontally. He held it at this kind of an angle, and he would only use 2 fingers which would produce 3 voices, 3 parts going on at once with 2 fingers. So this thumb had to take care of a bass and something in the middle. And this index finger had to play some inner harmony and then help articulate the melody on top. And then with the voice, which is number 4, you had 4 activities going on. The voice was completely unrelated in a way to all the others. Rhythmically, the phrasing was out of phase a bit because that's the blues style. And it all worked together as a mechanism. And as a teacher, I was his last pupil. I only got to him in 1971, around May. And he died May 1972. He was very sick that year. He had strokes. He was in the hospital, in and out of the hospital. I had the last lesson too. But as a teacher, he was a perfectionist. He wanted every detail in place before he could move ahead in the piece. And he made sure you understood it. And also, it was so important because when you hear his recordings, and you'll see in the film here, in Black Roots, there are certain notes that you hardly hear because they're not exactly melody notes or a bass note, but they're just in the texture somehow. If you don't perceive them when you study with him or later, you can't make the piece come to life because it is as important as the notes that are prominent. He was like a Swiss watchmaker, and every little gear of the mechanism was necessary, and it was absolutely intentional. It wasn't that the guitar's open string rang out of the blue spontaneously, but everything was carefully planned. And he played these pieces throughout his life as a thinker because he would reinvent them and improvise on them, so it became a language that he drew on. We couldn't really master it because we didn't have his world as a resource. And he had thousands of melodies and tens of thousands exponentially of ways of developing them and changing them on the spot, improvising them.
Mark Dresser. And I'm Johnson.
Beatrice. Where's Stefan? Back. This photo is a picture of Allan with my mother, Beate Sirota Gordon. She was a beneficiary, or our family was a beneficiary of what James mentioned, the home invasion form of research. Allan was looking for work of Leo Sirota, that's my grandfather and her father, and he, tracked her down somehow, and told her his mission, and said, "Do you have any recordings?" And she said, well, take a look in that closet over there. And there he found 30 to 50 hours of material, some of which he published in 3 CDs, and the rest of which will be published with his touch to it and a very important connection to him and what he did. My grandfather's legacy would not be known at all if it hadn't been for Allan. I think they both shared, one of the reasons I think they respected each other so much was that they had certain ideas about great art. I think, I'll put it to him for this conversation, of course, they were both widely educated in so many ways. And on the basis of that, I think he had an instinct for authenticity. He had an ability to identify excellence, no matter in what form, and also to find the genuine emotional connection based on those other qualities. There were no boundaries. It wasn't about what kind of art it was, or what genre. It was jazz, it was blues, it was gamelan, it was dead classical pianists, gagaku, and that was a big overlap with my mother. And he had published, as you know, quite a number of CDs that were not to do with classical music at all, or even jazz and blues. I wanted to mention a couple of personal stories about Allan's, what I call Allan's adventures and adventures with Allan. One thing you will find out at some point, because his memoir will be published, is that he spent part of his young life in South Africa, which I had never known until after he died, or when I saw his memoirs. And it was a very tough time, I think, there and for him, including with his extended family. I'm sure that informed a lot of his thinking. But what you can also see in it, he does some fabulous transcriptions of the accents that he heard. And it's almost as though he had, as he had an ear and perfect pitch for music, he could also reproduce faithfully the ways that people talked or talking. You'll really enjoy that. It will happen. So I just want to start with this question I once posed to Allan and Beatrice. So I said, well, how did you meet? Now, what I'm going to say may not be entirely accurate about times and places, but it's a true story. So, friend of a friend in Italy introduces them. And more or less the next day, Beatrice is on one of Allan's quests for the grail, a grail, one of the many grails of music. And they go to Transylvania. Now, maybe it wasn't Transylvania, but it was Transylvania. As you know, I mean, Transylvania means going across the forest. Well, they went across the forest. And so they're in Transylvania. They go to the forest. This is like a fairy tale, honest to God. They go into the forest. It gets dark. The two of them are alone, searching around. Allan has some idea that this grail exists in a dilapidated castle in this forest where some old guy lives who is guarding the treasure. And they get lost in the forest. And this part is the scariest part to me, and I think it explains their marriage to a very high degree. I don't know who, I can't imagine being in Beatrice's situation, meeting this guy one day, running off with him the next, to Transylvania and to probable danger, and following him and supporting that kind of effort. So, it being Allan, they do find the dilapidated castle, and there is an old man in the castle, and he has the Holy Grail, and they live with him for a few days afterwards. I just find that an incredible story. But I think that was his whole life, was just one of finding one adventure after another. And that included in the ways people have spoken about food and a lot of other things. And then to talk just a minute about his relationship with Stefan. Stefan is a theoretical physicist. So there are about 10 people in the world who can talk to him. And yet, when he was out of town quite often, because he was in school in the Midwest and doing doctoral work and so on, of course, when my husband Roger and I were visiting with Allan and Beatrice, obviously, how's your family, how's Stefan? And Allan would go into an incredible, educated, detailed description of the work that Stefan was doing. And so, in addition to his very evident tremendous love and pride in Stefan, he went to such extents, I have to believe, because he's not a theoretical physicist, he had to learn a lot to be able to talk the way he did intimately about what Stefan was doing. And I always took that as a very touching way that a parent can show a child how much they appreciate them. So the other thing with Allan were the emergency concerts. Emergency concerts, you'd get an email, rare opportunity, Philippe Entremont tonight at the keyboard series, see you there at 7. And my husband and I would see him there at 7. Now, what would have happened along the way would be another thing. He had been at the keyboard series all day. He complained to the manager that the piano was out of tune. The manager said, okay, we'll have a tuner in the break. They had a tuner. And Allan observed, I'm sure he was watching from the back to supervise if he could, an electronic device that's used for tuning pianos. And the concerts recommenced after that. And Allan, by the time we arrived, was so furious. He had gotten back to the manager and said, never do that again. If you bring a tuner in here who needs an electronic device to tune the piano, he can't tune the piano. He said it in a very forceful way, but that you get the idea there. So one other emergency concert was of a Turkish fellow who could play the guitar with 2 fingers, and they could do both the melody and the strumming at once. I'm not going to say the guitar was upside down or anything like that, but what I'm saying is basically true. And it was an amazing experience because the music was amazing, but it's also within a Turkish community hall of some kind. All kinds of food all over the place, nothing that you could recognize. But an amazing experience, and one, again, outside the world of classical music or anything like that. Third one I'll mention, emergency concert. We're going up to someplace in the middle of Harlem in a church. There's a South African guy there who does a lot of great noise and visual stuff. Have to go. We'll be online with some students of mine, and you join us on the line at 6 o'clock. And so my husband and I rush over to this part of town, and we're online, and we go in. And what follows is there's this guy on the stage with some help, speaking some more or less gibberish, but it comes from a text. There's a text He's speaking the text and banging the text with some kind of a, I don't know, cudgel, I think. And there's all kinds of very interesting visual stuff going on at the same time. I thought this was a really interesting event. I would not have put it necessarily in the music category, but it was a performance, a great virtuoso performance for sure. And I sort of put that way in the back of my head, and I had never heard of this guy, and I'm in the room probably the least familiar with anything that has to do with all the things we're discussing. I put that into my head, and then my husband and I did, this will happen only once in our lives, ever, but we were eating our cultural vegetables, and we went to see Wozzeck. And suddenly, and it has amazing sets, amazing typefaces that are used to reflect things that are going on. And it was just a knockout of a production. And I look in the program, because I'm thinking, wow, this is a real good production. Well, this fellow is William Kentridge. And a lot of you, I'm sure, maybe all of you know of him. I didn't at the time. But I saw him first in very informal circumstances, and then the very next time I saw him, it was at the other end of the cultural sphere in so many ways. So those were sort of immediate. There were also emergencies about going to restaurants and things like that. But we did talk about classical music from time to time. My grandfather was the link. I just will tell you one little story about that. I was studying a Chopin nocturne, and there's a place in it where there's an E flat in a chord, and that horrible way that the editors have, there's little parentheses. It says, well, you can just do a plain old natural E here. And I hate it when they do that. I'm sure people here find that liberating, but I'm too uninformed. I want to know what it is. I want to know the right answer. And I was talking to Allan about this, and I said, Allan, what is this? This changes. This is, minor goes to major. This is important. What's the right answer here? And Allan would get that very wide smile, and his eyes would get really, really big. His forehead would go up. And he would get this look, you knew something mischievous was going to come out of him. And I thought, I'm talking to an expert, he's going to give me an answer to my question. And he did in a way. He said, play it the kinkier way. And I have to say, I've thought about that so many times, and I think there are many layers of what that comment meant. But I'll leave you all to think about them on your own. So I do want to say, in my family, my brother and I grew up listening to my grandfather play, but he died before we were out of grade school. And we felt very moved by it, I think, as children, and I think we, to this day, would be able to recognize his playing just from having been exposed, because he was playing all the time, and we were living in my grandparents' house for the summer for many years. Ultimately, I'm sorry, I missed one thing I want to say about the breadth of Allan's interest. If you had the good luck to have a wonderful meal and some wine with the family, afterwards you'd go into the other room where the computer was, and Allan would show you little bits of very important things. An organ, a recital, some old pianist, something good, something bad. And then there would be like Bugs Bunny. And that's really true. And I recently looked up Bugs Bunny and who was the pianist for Bugs Bunny. And I urge you to look it up. There's a story behind it, which is too long for right now. But it's a serious story. Well, I wanted to say that he saved so many legacies. Of course, the one that I'm deeply concerned with and involved with is my grandfather's. And he left a vast collection for musical researchers and archivists, and that's going to have to be plumbed and produced in ways that people can have access to it. I know personally of stuff that is in there. Some of it's very minor that will be important and has to be cherished and taken care of properly. My immediate feeling about Allan is certainly not about the idea of saying goodbye. You know, we all have connections to him that are, you know, very present in our lives. But personally, I could not have heard my grandfather's playing after my grandfather died, if not for Allan. And so when I listened to my grandfather playing recordings that are almost a century old that Allan preserved, I feel Allan is always listening with me.
This is the last piece that I ever played for Allan. I would play occasionally in small collections of company. And Allan seemed quite pleased, so that gives me the impetus to play it for him one more time. This is Chopin's Nocturne in B major, opus 32, number 1, which ends with a chord that is sometimes major, sometimes minor, just like Nicole was saying. I think maybe it was the Nocturne you were referring to. Which way do you do? Well, let's find out together.
So listening to music with my dad, my best friend, is really my dearest memory. And a big part of that is listening to Albanian music with my dad. So let's hear a story of how Allan found this music in the time when Enver Hoxha was still held the walls around Albania, but Allan got the sound from across the Adriatic. So the view we have here is from a region in the Marche, where my grandparents are, where Allan spent many of his summers in the 1980s, and he was able to make this discovery here. So let's go straight to his blog post, and we'll read a segment from it. The rolling hills of Italy's Marche region led down to the Adriatic Sea. Way further south, hours and hours by train to Brindisi, one can imagine how just across the water lay the forbidden Albanian People's Republic. In the early 1980s, a composer friend, curious about a recording Henry Cowell placed into a Folkways anthology, truly extraplanetary Albanian music, headed over to a New York secret, their nearly unmarked Albanian mission to the UN. Albania only had friendly ties with North Korea. Russia was way too liberal for them in those years. A voice over the locked entrance speakerphone ordered him to go the hell away, followed by armed guards approaching. Albania's international programs on Radio Tirana beamed their way over the globe. Every hour was graced by a trumpet fanfare dreadfully ringing out each of the 24-hour clock. Propaganda 24/7 in all tongues. In the mid-1980s, on a hot summer afternoon, I switched away from their shortwave to hit the AM zone. Bypassing Italian pop channels, this rare sound, Sonic Orchid, emerged from the ether. A dream state from Tirana's hermetic local station escaped across the Adriatic. The signal went in and out of intelligibility. Their programming was chaotic, so for months a cassette was poised, the radio honing in on their frequency. My in-laws, miracles of tolerance for the sounds that continuously streamed until I would leap up from the table to capture some spontaneous gem.
Next up, Bice Horoshovsky.
I want to thank Beatrice and Stefan for giving me the opportunity to share my remembrances about Allan. The first time I met Allan was in New York at the Metropolitan Museum, December 3rd, 1983, for a recital of my husband that played a beautiful program, Bach and Chopin. Allan came backstage and introduced himself as a Ignaz Friedman scholar. Later on, Allan visited us in Philadelphia, and even later, I shared with him the documents which I had gathered in order to form a book, mainly Miecio's diaries. The one of 1940, translated from Polish, told with many details a visit of Miecio with his Swiss friend Seiler in Rome. Miecio played for Pope Pius XII and then went to the Vatican Radio and recorded a program about 40 minutes music that was on the diary. Allan didn't lose time. He went to Rome, found the tape at the Vatican Radio, made a copy out of it. Immediately after, the tape fell into pieces, the original tape. Yes. Allan produced so many more performances of my husband, first with Pearl and then with Arbiter. He he produced all Mozart sonatas, then concertos by Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and solo pieces by Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin, Schubert, and Brahms. And especially he produced 2 performances of the Diabelli variations, 2 different ones. He went to find tapes in Finland, in Italy, in New York, and especially at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. He wrote himself the booklets of the CDs, and he also made proofs out of the concerts, sending them to me to listen them. Allan came many times to see me in Italy, a long way from the region Marche, from where he came, through Ancona, Bologna, Milano. He brought to me heavy bottles of the delicious vino cotto, which Beatrice's father produced. Beatrice herself came to my place in Italy, and another time Allan came with his dear friend Piero Pisani and Stefan. The last double CD that Allan produced includes the tape of the Vatican with an improved sound. I want to express all my gratitude to the memory of Allan, a dear, dear, precious friend.
Hi, I'm Ed Herbst. Headline, Sound Archaeologist Allan Evans unearths a rooster, buried in shellac since 1929 and still ready to crow. In 1999, when Allan invited me to write the notes for what would become the first World Arbiter release, The Roots of Gamelan, I did it from the US without the opportunity to conduct field research specifically related to the 1928 recordings, relying on my years of study in Bali beginning in 1972. I did, however, already know Wayan Barata, the elderly son of Made Ragog, who had composed 7 of the tracks from 1928. So to inform my article, I sent a series of faxes with questions to Balinese friends who were able to visit Barata and facilitate our long-distance dialogue. Returning to Bali soon after Arbiter's CD was released in 1999, I and a couple of Balinese friends visited Barata at his home, and we listened together to the many pieces recorded in his village of Belaluan. When we played Churik Ngaras, Starlings Kissing, he laughed wistfully and said, "I haven't heard this since I was a kid." Mixed laughter and tears. He asked if I could copy the CD to cassette for him. And when I said I could bring it to him the next week, he replied, "How about tomorrow?" Within a week, I had received word from his nephew that Barata had already taught the composition to a children's gamelan club in his village. Previous to Arbiter's Roots of Gamelan CD and subsequent 5-volume Bali 1928 series of Odeon and Becker 78s, as well as Arbiter's Dancers of Bali CD of the 1952 Gamelan of Pliatan studio recording in New York. Very few Balinese had access to audio documentation of their own music recorded earlier than the 1970s, when the indigenous cassette industry began. The overwhelming responses I heard from musicians and singers, old and young, led Allan and me, in collaboration with Indonesian friends, toward a commitment to initiating a repatriation project of all existing recordings from 1928 and 29, the only pre-World War II recordings anyway, numbering, upon publication in 2015, 111 sides, each 3 minutes. This required a 15-year worldwide search carried out by Allan and me with the help of Philip Yampolsky for all existing 78s recorded on Bali in the 1920s. The greatest number of 78s we accessed were at the UCLA Ethnomusicology Archives Colin McPhee Collection and Indonesia's National Museum in Jakarta and Yogyakarta. In 2007, once the project was well underway, and after several of my research visits to Bali, upon Allan's strident insistence, my diplomacy, and amazingly, due to the great vision of the UCLA Ethnomusicology Archives faculty director at the time, Anthony Seeger, UCLA sent us a good many of the 78 RPM discs so Allan could make his own audio transfers at home in Queens. Many years of field research and writing have ensued since then and continue, including 15 hours of ethnographic film footage shot in 1930s Bali that we're releasing on DVDs. On my way to Bali via JFK Airport in 2014, I stopped at Allan's house in Flushing to receive his most recent audio transfers, master CDs. I was politely questioning the results that he had derived from the most recent software he had used. The audio detail was so real that some of the scratches were more audible as well. I commented that perhaps Balinese listeners would be distracted by the non-musical audio frequencies. He answered, "That's non-negotiable." After he played another track of gamelan, Beth Skinner commented, she said, "I think I agree with Allan." I wasn't exactly thrilled that she was indulging his intransigence, but as we listened again to the unaccompanied singing of Ida Bagus Oka Krabwak, who is top right there with his niece, Allan asked, "Did you hear that rooster?" He played it again, and to my amazement, I heard a rooster that had been hiding in the shellac during the 500 times I had listened already to the song with Balinese singers. So I was won over, and indeed, a week later, my Balinese colleagues agreed that the sonic depth Allan had achieved was an invaluable asset. Such audio evidence has been essential for Balinese listeners to recognize, reconceptualize, and fully appreciate subtle kinesthetic aspects of the singing, as well as specific elements that went into the creative evolution of instrumental gamelan music in the 1920s. From the project's inception, I realized that documenting the older generation's firsthand knowledge and personal memories was another essential repatriation activity, since cultural memory had faded over the past century, and so much of the musical content was unfamiliar to musicians and the general public. The compelling urgency of meeting a great many near centenarians and centenarians, hundreds of elders and their descendants, opened up completely new experiences for me personally as a musician and singer, and the incredible pleasure of getting to know a wide range of musicians, singers, dancers, priests, and traditional scholars. The project has been intensely collaborative, with Balinese colleagues joining in field research, translation of song texts, video editing, publishing, and wide dissemination, including over 100 public presentations in villages, arts institutes, universities, and galleries throughout Bali, Indonesia, and internationally. In 2013, Allan phoned me, excited to report that he had angled the stylus in a new way and was hearing gamelan sonorities hidden during his previous audio transfers. He mailed me a CD with a track, and sure enough, I could now hear krumpungan, very light drumming patterns, a klintong, a small high-pitched gong, and a kampul, a mid-sized gong. Soon after, Balinese colleagues were amazed to hear this unprecedented sonic evidence of a transitional carryover from classical legong instrumentation and technique during the birth of modern revolutionary kabyar in the 1920s. So, in addition to providing state-of-the-art digital restoration, Allan successfully brought to fruition original techniques that mechanically explore areas within the groove walls to fully expose sound otherwise left buried in shellac discs. Indeed, Allan literally got in the groove like no one else. So this heightened auditory detail triggered a difference in attitude among my Balinese musician friends. The earliest cassette dubs that I had brought to Bali were sometimes taken to be quaint curiosity of interest as nostalgia. But over the years and stages of audio restoration, performers took the recordings more and more seriously as two-dimensionality gave way to sonic depth and revelatory experience. So now let's see who can hear that distant rooster unearthed from the plate of shellac. It's very distant, it's very quiet. It's 1 minute and 9 seconds in. I think we're going to hear the track right now of Ida Bagus Oka Kerbuat, who we're seeing out there. Oh, my love, look at me now in such misery. When can I heal this heart's yearning? Struck by an arrow of love. As long as we cannot meet, I will only know suffering. We didn't hear it. The speakers, listening with Alan's speakers, we could hear it. If you listen with headphones, go online. You could listen for free on the Arbiter website. So that's Wayan Lotring, composer and musician, playing with his friends. It's music for the Balinese Shadow Play. And I could point out why this playing is completely unique, but the grandson of one of the four musicians, when he heard this recording, was totally freaked out. And no one plays, there are certain techniques going on there that don't exist anymore or haven't until we release this. We'll see. That's Lotring right there to the left in the center. And we have videos of him, or films of him performing in the 30s. No sound, though. So the rooster, if you go to any of the online sites that we have on the Arbiter website or in the notes, use really good speakers or use headphones. And at 1 minute and 9 seconds, I think I indicated in my copious program in my CD notes, you'll hear that rooster. James heard it, but he commented it was a very subtle rooster. It was probably not subtle, it was just that it was far away, because roosters in Bali aren't subtle.
Hello. My name is Arnold Dreiblatt. I'm very honored and privileged to be here today, and especially because Actually, it was not planned that I would be here. I live very far away in Berlin, in Germany. And as luck would have it, some events in my family in the States, I am here. But I should say that because I thought I wouldn't be able to attend this event for Allan, I had to think about what I would send. And should I send some music? But then I felt very strongly that I needed also for myself to remember him and put some words to the paper. And then my old friend, David Weinstein, who's here tonight, agreed to be my voice. So when I'm speaking, you can also picture David Weinstein up here. And I won't read the, I will read some of the text because it's not in the booklet, this wonderful booklet that's been prepared. I will annotate it a bit. It's interesting, I just wanted to say that thinking of David Weinstein, one of the aspects of these events is that we realize that we only know a small window into the person. We feel that when we hear all of these different personalities speak and tell stories that we know or maybe don't know. And then there's this aspect of, oh, you knew him too. So I just think of David. So I didn't know that David was also friends with Allan, and there are other persons here who, yeah, it's often surprising. Ed Herbst, who I haven't seen in probably 30 years, that we all meet here to remember him. It's ironic, I think, that I met Allan actually in Berlin, since we're very close in age. You know, we're both kind of New York Jews from Queens, and we actually grew up a stone's throw from each other on either side of the, I would call it the swamp known as Flushing Meadow Park, me in Forest Hills and Allan in Flushing. And when we met, my life as an expatriate had only recently begun. I think it must have been around 84, probably, which is around the time I moved to Berlin. And we instantly bonded with common musical interests, and especially a very strong interest to Eastern Europe. I had already begun my years of traveling in Eastern Europe in the East Bloc at that time. I should also mention, it's also interesting tonight because so many of you, or a large portion of those who are here, are somehow coming from the classical music world. And although I am a composer and an artist, as a composer I'm an autodidact, so completely self-trained and coming from a very different background. But I'm going to talk about the breadth of this person, Allan, but it just is, again, shows the breadth of his interests. I remember that my first meeting with Allan in New York some years later in the Flushing apartment where he was born, and then I remember being so surprised that this person who I'd met in Europe, who seemed to have traveled so far, not just geographically, but also in other ways, was still living in the apartment that he was born in Queens, and so close to where I had grown up. I want to say this, and it somehow echoes in me through the last hours of sitting here together and listening to all of you, that I've always felt very strongly that the most interesting people in the world, the most interesting people I've known, are those individuals that one can't describe very easily or simply in one sentence, like, oh, he's a composer or he's an artist. The answer to that question for these people is kind of a long, shaggy dog story, or many stories. And actually, as we've seen today, our remembering Allan is so full of stories. Stories that you have to sit down with and take time for. And so it was with Allan, like the list of identities and, okay, if you would say professions, even the term profession doesn't really apply to Allan, and person, it's so vast and so long, and it's repeated over and over tonight. I'm not going to read my list. I made a little list that goes on for a few lines of typewritten words on the page. And then I wrote, but I have to stop myself from carrying on with this list because Allan is running, yes, running enthusiastically after me, overtaking me on my way to the Long Island Railroad stop after a visit to his home and family in Flushing. I see that twinkle in his eyes, that smile that says you're going to love this, bubbling with excitement, just to tell me one last restaurant he had discovered, one new dish that he had forgotten to tell me about, one unearthed recording that he had recently discovered. And as we know, Allan was such a born communicator. He didn't want to keep it all to himself. He had to share it with his family and his ever-widening circle and networks of friends, collaborators, and colleagues. And that's a testament to what we've experiencing here together. And I think that, in a sense, Allan was so much more than a collector. Like the title of his musical label, historical label, Arbiter, he was a kind of referee or umpire of all these almost forgotten musical delicacies, actually the delicacies that would have been forgotten, as we are learning, if it had not been for Allan's work. He unearthed that which would reactivate the past, sifting out the essential and holding it up to us as if to say, taste it, and you will be reborn. Allan was not concerned with the borders, identities, and hierarchies associated with musical genres. A Reverend Gary Davis blues riff was as much a shining jewel as a bar of Rachmaninoff, yet his choices were not arbitrary. He could always tell you what was it that made that selection essential. For Allan, the stories behind the acquisitions, the searchings, and the findings were just as important as the objects of his obsessions. There was not only that great restaurant, but there was also the life story of the proprietor's journey to America and his brother that had another, even better restaurant in Brooklyn. The finding of that rare recording inevitably included a complicated network of serendipitous occurrences, meetings with the nephew and the granddaughter of the pianist, happening upon a trace of a former student in Cairo and in Jerusalem, inevitably tracing all threads to all possible conclusions. And I think we've also heard that over and over again, that when it's been spoken of the closet, the closet becomes almost mythological. What's in the closet? What's buried? And also in my correspondences with Allan over the years, because we were far away from each other and didn't see each other often enough, he would always report on the latest news about his son, Stefan's successes, and also with long explanations of his research, which I never understood, but which he was infinitely proud of, as we know, as well as descriptions of his beloved wife's Beatrice's artworks and photos of what she's working on, the visits to the family in Italy, and also reports on the Italian language school that kept them all going. So as I started to try to write about him, I went into my own archives and I found some old correspondences, and in one undated letter, which I think was probably from the early 90s, he reports on playing at a blues festival in Tallinn. He tells about a cassette of Albanian clarinet music that I've just got to hear. We both shared a great interest in Albanian folk music. New discoveries for the ongoing Ignaz Friedman book, which went on for years, and he periodically sent me new information he had discovered. He asked me if I know the Shags, the rock group The Shags, which he says were even better than the Beatles. He talks about the cookbook he's writing with Beatrice on the food of her region. He tells about hanging out with Alex Melamed of the artist duo Komar and Melamed, and insists that I've got to meet Alex the next time I come to New York. And strangely today in Facebook, when I opened Facebook, Alex Melamed asked me to be his friend. So today, yeah. So it was interesting to read these words and think that I'm going to read this tonight. And then he refers to the latest book by Chernovitz-born writer Gregor from Rizzori, who Allan sought out and met finally in Italy. And we often talked about his books in the 1980s when we first met. And finally, he reports some new discoveries related to his father's history in Lithuania. Allan's passions were as infectious as was his intense devotion to his family and friends. Yet during his lifetime, I know that he had to make do with less recognition than he rightfully deserved. Far too late, we now regard the richness of his life, a life that was cut far too short. But how to sum up a life, any life, especially a life lived so intensely? We're here, we remember him collectively, and we feel the emptiness of the loss and also what he left behind, which is beyond words. My last sentence was, okay, this was me thinking in Berlin, somebody else is going to read this, and I'm so far away. I wrote that I'd like to think that sometime far into the future, someone will stumble upon even more recordings, some forgotten books, and some unpublished manuscripts. And we'll try to reconstruct this person, Allan Evans, and we'll be amazed. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnold. That was nice. Ed, I don't know if I believe in the rooster. Well, I heard something. No, it's there. I'm sure the rooster is there. I believe in the rooster. One of Allan's talented students who loved him very much and still does in his thoughts and memory is Kenichi Ukuno, who lives in Mexico City and studied with Allan at the Mana School. Kenichi wrote a composition dedicated to Allan. It's called Chorale on the Name Allan Evans. Now, B-A-C-H, that's something I can hum. Allan Evans, I'm not sure exactly what the code is. Maybe somebody would like to research where Allan Evans appears in there, but I'm sure that Kenichi knows that Allan's name is in there. And we're going to hear the composition performed for us on a file, an audio file. This is the composer playing the lovely chorale on the name Allan Evans. lovely composition by Allan's student and friend Kenichi Kono. We're going to hear and watch a video sent to us from Lake Como. Two of our dearest friends, Anne Mottier and Francois Mottier. Anne and Francois Mottier, if you prefer. They run the Schnabel Music Foundation. Anne is the daughter of Karl Ulrich Schnabel, who was the son of Arthur Schnabel. Wonderful people. We miss them terribly. We wish they were here, but then again, it's nice that they're in the beautiful Lake Como, as you will see. You will envy where they are, for sure. Here's Anne and Francois Mottier.
With you, we wish we could. We certainly. Hello to all from Lake Como in Italy. Unfortunately, we can't be with you. We wish we could. We certainly will be thinking of you. Of course, Beatrice and Stefan, we're with you in thoughts with much love.
We were hoping to welcome Allan here. His love for Italy and his love for music would have been served so well in this location. We'll be with you in our thoughts when you all gather for the memorial.
Beatrice e Stefan, vi aspettiamo qui il più presto possibile, ci mancate tantissimo. Saluti dal lago di Como. Bye to everybody, our best.
Good evening, dear friends, and thank you so much for being here. It's a great to remember our friend Allan Evans, who was my dear teacher and friend, and it's always difficult to speak about true musician because there is always some mystery, something undescribable when you talk about true musician. Something which is above the professionalism, above any skills of knowledge. And Allan had that. I don't know how it happened, but when I came to his lessons at Manor School of Music, I always got something very special. For example, if it wouldn't be, it were not private lessons, it were group lessons, but if I would learn Chopin mazurkas, he would give some seminar on Chopin mazurkas and would explain how to play them. And if I would struggle with my sound, how to play Chopin, he would describe how Harshovsky would fill the whole hall with his sound, that he took all the place in the hall, and after that, like playing the piano would become much more easy for me and more enjoyable. And he really helped me to find myself. I remember one of our last meetings at Penn Station at a very casual sushi place which calls Wasabi, and we spent there an hour and a couple, and he told me a lot about Mieczyslaw Harshovsky and of course about our favorite Debussy, and he mentioned the recording of Children's Corner, which I never knew before that. And soon after that he died, and I decided to learn children's corner in Allan's memory. And this recording helped me a lot. And I even opened for myself that there are two recordings, one studio one, and studio recordings for me is even more interesting because there are unlimited new ideas which Harshovsky gave us, the future generations. So I really don't know how to describe Allan's talent, but he really changed lives of his friends and students. So I will play Serenade for the Doll and Snow is Dancing from Children's Corner by Debussy.
I don't like to plan ahead so much or to predict anything because life and music and culture are totally unpredictable, so you never know what you're going to encounter next year even. It's hard to plan ahead that much. I have maybe 5 or 10 or 20 projects even in mind. And then there'll be world music projects, whatever comes along. I hope to do something from Java, a few more from Japan, other countries, American gospel. As these things happen, we're all ears and ready to go. But it's totally unpredictable. You could never have any idea of what's going to happen. But I just hope to be ready to capture or to help others capture these people who have what it takes.
Thanks to Sam Yanati for recording the last bit from Allan that we heard. It's a sad pleasure being with you all. I want to recommend that you read the booklet that you found, and you will see astonishing evidence of the kind of friend that Allan was to so many people. The outpourings of memories and feelings and gratitude that are in the pages of that book are really stunning. We thank everyone for being here, for joining us on the live stream on Vimeo. And we do have time and an opportunity to hear anyone who might have a memory of Allan Evans. I have plenty. We all do. The thing about Allan, one of the many things about Allan, is that another of his great talents was friendship. And he was consistent. The Allan that one of us knew is the Allan that all of us knew. That's a rare quality. It's really being true to yourself. And we thank Allan for enriching our lives, and not just with his recovery of old records and old sounds and his wonderful insights. Have you ever read the notes on his webpage, Arbiter? Do you know how deep those things go? His commentary on his Arbiter CDs, they go way beyond the notes that accompany those CDs. But Allan, just because he issued a CD, it doesn't mean that he stopped thinking about that. He continued to think about everything that he dug deeper and deeper. I mean, he was driven to know and learn. And what a sweet guy. So sweet. Seth, I think you mentioned that you might like to say something. Beatrice.
Just to say thank you, really. It's incredible to say. It's incredible is a kind of vague nothing, but it is really, because I can't even totally understand what's going on, but you are wonderful here. Allan wrote, as James mentioned, memoirs. If it just finished them a few days before the catastrophe, and soon will be published, and we'll definitely post you for that, and we'll keep you informed. Okay. Well, it's funny that by coincidence, if coincidence exists, today is September 3rd. I realized a few weeks ago that actually we got married on September 3rd. Yeah, that was the day. David, on 1987, a few years ago, or yesterday. So that's where we are. And oh, by the way, no, Allan is wasn't born in Queens. He's a Californian boy. You may not find it so blonde and as a surfer, but he was born in California. And no Renoir. Absolutely. Welcome.